lovely to meet you here today. Now, first of all, tell me a little bit about Roots Revealed. Whenever I first heard about this, I did think it was something about hair salons closing after lockdown. But tell me about it. It's much more interesting than that, isn't it?
Yes, it is. Well, I think it is anyway. I'm delighted now to say that my genealogy tours have become one of Tourism Northern Ireland's Embrace a Giant Spirit experiences, and it's called Ancestral Adventures.
It's so interesting to see just what you can find out about your own family. A lot of people don't really know where to begin with this sort of thing, but you provide tours. Tell me a little bit more about that.
I knew that there were so many people who had an Irish heritage, and we have so many people from America and from Canada in particular who have got Irish ancestry. And I knew that so many of them were interested to find out where the roots were, and they wanted to come back and maybe see those places that were associated with their family. So I qualified as a tour guide as well and started to offer these genealogy tours for people. So that's really about taking them to the places that are of interest to them. So, maybe the churches their ancestors married in, the graveyards they're buried in. Maybe there's still a little cottage still standing where their ancestors were living and raised a family. So it's lovely to be able to take people to those places that are special and of interest to them. So they're off the beaten track, they're not an off the peg thing, and very much specific and bespoke for an individual person.
Talk me through the process then for people who want to try to get involved with something like this. How does it work?
People get in touch with me and they say that they maybe want some research done. So I will find out what they already know. So I ask them to complete a form. They complete that form, and then I will carry out a free assessment for them to determine the likelihood of being able to find further information and further records. I'll go back and give them a quote, and then they can decide whether they want to go ahead with the work. I carry out the research, provide them with a fully referenced report, and include, where possible, copies of documents, and then send the report off to them. Some people then want to take that a stage further and go on a genealogy tour, so they want to come and visit those places, and so I can then build an itinerary for them based on what they would like to see. And you can always add in other things they might be interested in, maybe like food and drink, or a farm tour, or maybe Game of Thrones. So, it's all very much individualised.
It's the whole package then, really, isn't it? A bit of food and drink sounds good to me. I think for something like this, it can be quite an emotional journey for a lot of people. I mean, what do you think people can expect?
You're going somewhere where the usual tourists don't go. So it's not the run-of-the-mill places where you've got, tour buses lined up. So these are very much off the beaten track places, and it's the places where the locals know about, I suppose. And maybe even places where the locals don't know about. Quite often we'll bump into locals who are very willing to help and very interested to hear that there are visitors coming who have got ancestors from that area. On one occasion we had a farmer who piled us all into his jeep and took us on a tour of his farm and showed us where the visitor's ancestor's house had once stood. And he stood in the very spot, and he described what the house had looked like and told them, what life was like. I like to tell people about the local history and, how people lived, and weave in all of those stories about the landscape and about the mythology and the fairies and the fairy thorns and, these things that maybe people aren't so much aware of. But it gives them an understanding and a flavour of how their ancestors lived.
There is something very magical about looking into the past, isn't there? For anyone watching this, who wants to look into their own past and seek out their own family history in Ireland and Northern Ireland, what's the best piece of advice you would give them? Where do they start?
Well, I suppose the best thing to do is to start with yourself and work your way back in a logical way. For people whose ancestors have come from here and it's been a few generations back, I would say try and find out as much as you can about the person in the country that they emigrated to, because you can often find useful clues there. So, things like how they named their children. So we have a naming tradition here. Is there information on their headstone? What did they call their house? Was it maybe named after the townland they came from? What denomination were they? So there are all sorts of things that can provide useful clues that might help to tie down a person whenever we try to find them in Ireland or Northern Ireland.
I think for me, I'd quite like to find out if there was any baddies in my family history at all. That's always much more interesting, isn't it? Natalie, it's been a pleasure to meet you here today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.